Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this IT Governance webinar. My name is David Grove, and I'm the Head of Technical Services at IT Governance. In this webinar, I'm going to be providing you with a practical introduction to how to conduct penetration testing and guidance on how to make a cost-effective program within your organization. I should point out that everyone will be muted for the duration of this webinar, but if there are any questions you have, please do feel free to type them in as we go along, and we will address those questions towards the end. For anyone wondering, we'll also be emailing out a copy of the presentation slides and a webinar recording tomorrow, so you'll have a chance to review the content. First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about IT governance. So we've been helping clients secure their information and comply with industry standards since 2005. Two of our directors were in fact responsible for the world's first implementation of an information security management system that conformed to BS 7799. That was the forerunner to ISO 27001. Nowadays, our consultancy practice will help clients to protect and secure their intellectual capital, comply with relevant regulations and standards, and to thrive as they achieve their strategic goals through better IT management. We're also a leading provider of training courses from foundation to advanced level, as well as online courses for all IT practitioners, including both PCI and certified ethical hacker qualifications. My role is to look after our technical service practice, and I'm responsible for delivering a range of services, including penetration testing, Cyber Essentials certification, and PCI DSS compliance. We are a member of the Certified Register of Ethical Security Testers that some of you will probably know as CREST, which means that as a pen testing company, we adhere to an audited, methodical approach to our testing, and that all of our consultants will follow a recognized certification path that helps to keep their skills relevant and current. So today, we are going to have a look at some of the challenges behind creating a penetration testing program. I'm sure many of you have wondered about how to make it cost effective and how to justify cost to your board. So we'll be looking at techniques you can use to maximize the return on your investment, and how to justify that expenditure and show that you're getting good value for money. We're going to look at some of the top attack vectors and some of the threats that organizations face, and the techniques used by cyber criminals, and to see how penetration testing can be used to help prevent breaches. We're also going to look at the role of penetration testing in your audit and compliance programs, and discuss how to construct a program that fits your needs and can be combined in with those compliance activities. So first of all, let's address the myth that criminal hackers only go after the big guys. I'm sure we've all heard of Sony, Target, Yahoo, and more recently Equifax, between them accounting for more than 3 billion user records being stolen. That's one for every 2 people across the planet. However, these are just the newsworthy household names, and according to Verizon's 2017 data breach investigation report, almost 2/3 of data breach victims were businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees. And if we think more about the approach of criminal hackers, we know that they are not only after the big prizes. We've all received in our personal Gmail accounts emails from Nigerian princes, and we all get repeated phone calls from abroad with people claiming to be from BT or Microsoft. Hackers really are after organizations and individuals, people of all sizes. The truth is that the majority of criminal hackers aren't the state-sponsored activities, such as the Chinese or the Koreans that we hear so much about, and they're not always activists looking for high-profile targets. They typically don't spend countless hours staking out and researching their targets, but instead they're much more opportunistic, looking for a chance maybe to make a quick buck, just like an organized house burglar might send out scouts for signs of easy targets through an estate of hundreds of houses. The modern cyber criminal will send out their phishing emails or their network scans, and they're looking for vulnerable systems. In a single night, they may be able to assess millions of potential targets as opposed to the hundreds from the house burglar. And I'm going to keep coming back to this house burglar analogy as we go through the presentation to help understand more about the techniques that hackers use and the different types of pen testing. But until we do come back to that, just consider that, as in with house burglaries, making yourself a harder target than your neighbor can go a long way towards increasing your chances of staying safe. In order to establish a meaningful defense strategy, we should look at some time understanding the threats that we all face. Way back in 2014, Verizon, their breach investigation report identified 9 attack strategies. And in this year's report, with almost 2,000 breaches covered, those strategies still hold strong. As we can see from the slide there, web application attacks performed by outside parties still top the charts. And this just reinforces the fact that our perpetrators are often remote and they're scanning the web looking for the most vulnerable and lucrative targets. Traditionally, the response to this risk that many security consultants will endorse is that you need to perform a full pen test of your entire estate. But this, as I'm sure you're aware, can be a very expensive and time-consuming exercise and result in a vast array of unsorted remediation activities. So ultimately, following that pen testing exercise, your total expenditure isn't necessarily proportional to the risk you face or even address the key problems that you have. As you've realized, I like an analogy. So if we compare our approach to cyber risk to that of risks in developing new software products, for example, some of you will have your own software development teams, but few of you will have several independent teams, each developing the same product in different languages on different platforms, just to mitigate the risks of late, buggy software. Sure, if you're developing a nuclear power plant, then the impact of a potential issue might justify that additional expense. But for the average one of us, there's simply no need for that extra resource, that extra expense, and there's just no justification against the risks that are posed to us. In just the same way, we need to understand the risks that we're facing in the cyber world and how we can mitigate those risks proportionately and spend our money wisely. So who do cyber attacks happen to? Well, many of you will have heard the famous quote from John Chambers when he was the CEO from Cisco, that there are 2 types of companies in the world. There are those that have been hacked and those who don't yet know they've been hacked. And to be honest, this is perhaps an apocalyptic view of the world, and it's certainly true that we're all targets. In fact, 46% of all UK businesses identified security breaches or attacks in 2016. So we've looked at some of the perpetrators and the strategies that they might employ, but what about the cost and impact of a breach? How do we measure that? And those costs can take many different forms, from the corruption of data resulting in lower productivity or lost opportunity as we try to rebuild and regain our databases, regulatory action, thinking particularly about PCI DSS and obviously GDPR coming up soon, litigation and legal action against our actions, and of course the reputational damage that could affect our future revenue streams or share price, as was so well exemplified with the hack of TalkTalk recently. So let's try to quantify some of these costs. We all hear scare stories, and I'm certainly not one for trying to sell through scaremongering. But in the case of Yahoo, the series of breach revelations whilst they were being acquired by Verizon resulted in their purchase price dropping by $350 million. But I'm not suggesting that's a figure that we can all relate to. So we're going to turn to Kaspersky Labs' recent report from this year, which has some more recognizable figures in it. So in here, according to Kaspersky, small to medium enterprises report a total cost of over £60,000 per breach, rising to much nearer to £700,000 for larger companies. As we can see from the chart there, in both cases, external consultants and reputational damage were significant factors. But it is noticeable that regulatory fines were not included in these numbers. And obviously with the enforcement of GDPR coming up on the 25th of May next year, then prospective fines of the greater of 4% of annual revenue or 20 million euros for failures to protect personal data, I think it's fair to say that these costs are only going to soar. Of course, there are countless different things that you can do to help reduce the costs following a breach. I'm sure you're all aware of the merits of maintaining reliable backups, implementing and maintaining systems such as IPS or IDS that might spot and disarm malicious activity quickly, and creating an incident response plan, of course, so that you know what to do should the worst happen. But whilst these are all very good activities and thoroughly recommended, they are outside today's discussion, and instead we're going to carry on looking at breach prevention. So just to give you an idea of what we typically find when we're pen testing for clients, over the last 12 months, our client testing has uncovered an average of 11 critical or high risk issues per test. Critical or high risk we class as anything that could allow an attacker to gain full control of the system or execute their own system commands, or perhaps exfiltrate sensitive or private data. And don't just take our word for it. According to Nuix's Black Report this year, in over 80% of cases, access was gained by testers in under 12 hours. So it just goes to emphasize the fact that there are a lot of easy targets within websites and within networks. And again, re-emphasizing, if you can make yourself a bit harder target than the guy next door, then you'd increase your chances of staying safe. Any pen test report should provide you with a prioritized list of these vulnerabilities identified and recommend the actions that you should take to remediate the issues. But also within our reporting, we like to give you insight to help you assess the commercial risk so that you can focus your expenditure on where it can have the most impact for the threats that you specifically face. Our clients will come to us for a variety of reasons, looking for a penetration test. First of all, there's nothing like a big breach story to get everyone thinking, could that happen to me? And certainly in years gone by, we would see a spike in demand following high-profile breaches such as Sony or LinkedIn. But now, to be honest, breaches are being announced so often, it's hard for us to spot this correlation, and we're seeing a very steady level of demand as management teams are clearly constantly asking, could this be us? Could we be next? Other reasons that our clients might implement pen testing is if they have some new systems or a significant change in technology. That tends to bring security to the top of the agenda. We've covered websites, video games, smart TVs, Internet of Things. I'm sure we'd all like to think that somewhere in the development cycle, someone is asking the question, is it secure? But all too often, people will think about that system in isolation, and we need to think about a much bigger picture. So, for example, if someone hacked my smart coffee machine and put extra milk in my latte, well, that's probably not going to be the end of the world. But if that coffee machine was sitting on the same network as my client management system or my e-commerce site, then it could easily become a gateway to greater rewards for any attacker. Clients also come to us if they're looking to protect a specific block of data, perhaps be it some intellectual property that's critical to their business, or a client-facing website where data loss would cause some major reputational damage. And this is also true of organizations considering or going through the acquisition process, where integration of systems and networks can leave data in one company exposed to vulnerability in another. And of course, compliance is still a very big driver. So let's have a look a little bit closer at some of the drivers there. Historically, I think we can all admit that we need laws to protect us, whether it be making us wear crash helmets or seat belts when we're out on the road, or putting requirements on organizations that might otherwise try and cut costs by omitting vital safety features. And it's not too big a leap to say that the same principle applies to our cybersecurity, and regulation is playing an increasingly important role in keeping us safe. So looking at vulnerability management requirements of, say, ISO 27001, which many of you will be familiar with. PCI DSS requires its proof of network segmentation to keep your cardholder data safe. And of course, the requirement for regular technical security testing that's set out in GDPR. Regulation is only going to increase and will continue to play an important role in driving forward our security assessments. I think it's almost inevitable that at some stage we'll all be required to demonstrate a proportionate and an adequate approach to handling our cyber risks, whether we're holding personal data, intellectual property, or just delivering internet smart connected devices. So we've had a look at why your organization might require a pen test. We've looked at some of the drivers behind that, and we've looked at some of the threats and the opportunities for attackers. And now it's time to start looking at some of the approaches that you can take with pen testing to address those threats and mitigate your risks. I think I would like to start, I'll address a question that we often get asked, and that is, what is the difference between a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test? So a vulnerability assessment is typically driven by automated tools. It will scan your network or applications for common or known about vulnerabilities, and that could be outdated or vulnerable software, services or applications that might be open to attack because they've been badly configured or badly coded. In general, new vulnerabilities or weaknesses that attackers can use to exploit you. And these are being discovered all the time, and no one is expecting you to keep abreast of them all and do your own research. So it can all be done for you. There are a plethora of vulnerability scanning services that you can easily and cheaply configure to scan internal and external machines. And these will just produce a list of issues and ensure that system and application updates are rolled out in a timely fashion, and are very good for actually trying to enforce your own internal policies and policing your own internal policies. So vulnerability assessments, very important, have their role in the world. A pen test, on the other hand, is a simulation of a real-life attack from an assailant. Pen testers will use vulnerability scans themselves, gather some vulnerability information, but also look to combine that with other sources, perhaps from big data sources in social media, and manually test against those vulnerabilities for means of compromising the host network or service. They might combine vulnerabilities, exploit weaknesses in application logic, and generally do things that are currently beyond the remit of automated scanners. The output from a pen test won't just give you a list of issues, but it will give you some sense of what is the impact of these vulnerabilities, what data could be accessed, what are your systems, what damage could an attacker do, could they take over your systems, and can provide detailed and also prioritize advice on remediation. Where can you focus your efforts such they'll have the greatest impact in reducing your risk? Here at IT Governance, we go one step further and don't just have vulnerability assessments or pen testing, but we also make a distinction between what we call a level 1 and a level 2 pen test. And a level 1 pen test will be appropriate for many of you out there seeking to mitigate the threat of the opportunist attacker, someone who's looking for easy targets. By combining a level 1 testing program with regular vulnerability scan, you can get a sense of the priority of the issues that are identified, prioritize their resolution, and come up with a much more comprehensive assessment of what risk you have to external threats. Level 2 testing, on the other hand, is aimed at organizations that may be specifically targeted by an attacker. So perhaps because of the information they hold or the nature of their business. And we think of hacktivists who might target animal research labs. So during an IT governance level 2 test, any identified vulnerabilities, we will attempt to exploit them. The attacker will try to get access to internal systems and data and identify further issues within the network that wouldn't normally be externally visible, such as perhaps the storage of sensitive data in clear text, or some poor development practices that maybe leave your databases open to access once an attacker is in. So I said I'd come back to the house burglar analogy, and we can see that quite here, that a vulnerability assessment is that would-be thief walking down the street looking for the unlocked doors and the windows, looking for potential houses that they can attack and potential vulnerabilities. A level 1 pen test might take a peek through some of those doors and have a look what's behind them, see if there's anything in there that'd be worth an attack. And this can help you prioritize which of the vulnerabilities you might want to fix by looking through the eyes of that opportunist thief. The level 2 pen test is much more thorough and will allow you to, and the attacker will actually go through that open door. They'll find the safe that you kept hidden behind the picture on the wall over the fireplace. They'll use social media to find when your friends posted pictures of your birthday and use your birthday date to guess the safe's combination. So it really does open up a lot more inside your network, and a lot more vulnerabilities that maybe you may be suffering, not just because of technical issues, but because of how people operate within your organization. So hopefully that's helped you understand how we approach different levels of penetration testing, the vulnerability assessment, the level 1 pen test, and the deep dive level 2 pen test, and to who they might be appropriate for. So there's lots of different styles of pen testing we can do, and lots of different things that we can test, and let's have a quick run through some of these. So many of these will be familiar with you, some of them you may not be aware are things that we can test. So first of all, we start off with the external network test, and as the name might suggest, this is a test against the external touch points for an organization. So those outward facing web servers, the VPN access that your employees or your customers might have. Essentially, it's the outward facing attack service that would be available to an attacker. We would normally, as with many of our tests, we perform this unauthenticated, so where the user is a complete unknown to us, or maybe as an authenticated user, an employee or a business partner who might have logon credentials to your website or to your network. If we perform a level 1 external test, then we'll identify issues such as vulnerable or outdated services that come out of the vulnerability assessment, and also look at any unnecessarily open ports, firewall configurations that are allowing inappropriate traffic through or unrequired traffic through, and also look at any clear text data that might be in transit and could potentially pose you a risk. And again, over and above the vulnerability assessment, those will be prioritized to help you work out the best way to mitigate your risks. A level 2 pen test, external network test, will look to exploit those vulnerabilities to gain further access to the systems and provide proof of concept that not just hypothetically somebody could get access, but actually show how that access can be gained, and not just to the external facing systems themselves, but also using those systems as a man in the middle to jump into internal systems within your network and reveal some further vulnerabilities within systems. As well as external, we also offer internal network tests, and these are often not considered by our clients because they tend to consider the outside attacker, but internal tests have their value as well. And again, we can do this either from the perspective of an authenticated user, such as an employee with access to the internal network, or an unauthenticated user who's already got access either physically by walking through the building and tailgating someone, or by exploiting some of the external vulnerabilities and gaining access that route. Internal testing, due to its nature and the exploitation of vulnerabilities that's required as part of this, we will only offer this as a level 2 service, but it can be extremely valuable in ensuring that sensitive or personal data can only be accessed by the appropriate people, and that your corporate policies, such things as password policy, antivirus policies, patching policies, are all being adequately implemented internally, and that not only you're well protected from the insider threat of the malicious employee, but also anyone who gains illicit access only has limited access to the internals of your network. Probably the test that most of you will be familiar with is the application pen test, and here we will challenge the logic that's been implemented either in a web application or thick client application and identify areas of weakness that can result in some unintended consequences. For example, a typical error is failure to adequately validate user input, so whether you have any user input fields in your website or the ability to download files. These can often be exploited to gain access to the underlying database, or to use a technique such as cross-site scripting, where you can lead an unwitting user to a malicious website. Unbeknownst to them, they think they're still part of your domain, part of your website, but they get led somewhere else where their credentials or their personal data can be captured. As before, we can do level 1 or level 2 testing. So level 1 testing will assess the application for vulnerabilities and provide the prioritized remediation advice. Level 2 is appropriate where we have multiple user levels. For example, regular users and administrator users, and we'll try to escalate privilege from one user type to another, or try and access data that one user can see and see if they can access the data of another user. And such level 2 testing is particularly required if your website is an e-commerce site, so handling card data. It is a PCI DSS requirement that you do a full pen test of that site, as well as proving the segmentation of that network from other applications. We would recommend level 2 for web apps where there might be some reason for a targeted approach, or there is particularly personal or sensitive data that sits behind that website. Most of you, I imagine, have got wireless networks within your office, and these can also represent a significant vulnerability. Especially as with wireless, you may not always have full control of the devices that are connected or full visibility. A level 1 wireless test will just identify any rogue access points that people might have set up, and this could have been done by employees for purely legitimate reasons. As far as I was concerned, the wireless was a bit weak in one part of the office, so they extend it. And they may not implement a decent encryption algorithm, or may not implement a very strong key for that wireless extension. A level 2 test, for example, though, will look at how well segmented your networks are, and again try to exploit those wireless connections. And we've had a number of tests where we've actually been sat in the car park, logged onto a guest wireless, and gained full access to the internal corporate network and corporate machines, and in one case some stock exchange trading machines. So always worth doing a wireless test. Make sure your networks are properly segmented and people can't jump across from one to the other, especially where you've got guest wireless involved. A final type of testing moves slightly away from the technical, but we also offer social engineering. We bundle this in with our penetration testing because it's the same goal. It's about gaining information and gaining access to a target. And again, we can help defend against the opportunist or also the targeted attacker. So phishing assessments, for example, can be used to test your employees' adherence to your security policies, and to test the ability of your website, your email servers to identify potentially malicious email, or physical social engineering tests where somebody will actually turn up to your office and try to gain access through either tailgating employees or impersonating a service provider. Can test how security aware your organization is, and how well those policies are being implemented. These, combined with some of the online or classroom training courses that we offer in security awareness and simulated attacks, can be used as a persistent reminder of the threats, and really sort of try and enforce your security awareness program and make sure that employees are responding in the correct way to any threats that they encounter. I just want to talk briefly about some of the reporting. So all of our testing, you would get a report at the end on the activities that we've done, the scope of what we've tested, which IP addresses, which URLs, which offices, the methodology we used, and the types of tests that we performed. So you've got a good understanding of what was addressed, and maybe if there were some things left out of scope for some reason, why that was. And obviously you'll get a list of security issues that we've identified, and along with the business risk that it represents. So not just a vulnerability with a number, but actually because of this could be exploited. This was the data we could get access to. This was the system we could compromise. Our reports, we also give you advice on any related findings that we might have about how to improve your own security posture, or or processes to help back up some of the findings and prevent recurrence of some of the issues that we identified. And that pen testing report is really key to understanding your business risks and where to prioritize your remediation activity. And the benefits you can get out of your pen test should all be contained within that report. So to summarize where we are, we've looked at why to carry out pen testing. We've looked at the types of pen testing available, and the threats that you face, and how you should combine this information to help shape your program. And we'll come to some examples later on as we try and pull together what we've covered. So reflecting back on the most common attack vectors, if you remember from the Verizon report on one of the earlier slides, and we've matched them against the different range of penetration testing types that are available. And I'm not going to pick out all the points on this matrix. As I said, these slides will be available to you. But I just want to point out the importance of awareness training for your employees. It covers nearly every kind of threat that you could face, and also the need for internal testing that we spoke about earlier as well. How internal testing can not only mitigate against the threat of the malicious employee or someone already with access, but also the attacker who gains access through their own illicit means. And that internal testing can really help limit the impact of any breach. People still see pen testing as testing the security of their perimeter, and really it's about testing your defenses right through the organization, and not only helping prevent a breach, but helping also to limit the damage that it can cause. So right at the start, I promised you a strategy for setting out your requirements for cost-effective pen testing, and this is our attempt at it. So first of all, evaluate your drivers. If you're looking for PCI compliance or standards to compliance with another standard, then maybe there's some specific piece of data that you need to protect. Work out the scope of that data environment, prove that it's segmented from everything else through testing access from different points. If you're responding to breaches of other organizations in your sector, then understand what form those attacks took, what motivated them, what was the end game of the attackers, what was the information they were looking for. Understanding the threats you face. Is it the stereotype teenager in a hoodie who's just looking for some way of showing off to his mates, or is it a sophisticated state-sponsored criminal looking to disrupt electricity supplies or critical national infrastructure? If you as a business have a high number of transient workers or a lot of guest Wi-Fi users, a lot of visitors to your premises, then perhaps you have a greater insider risk and internal testing is more appropriate. So it's really important to understand the motives and the techniques of your assailant, understanding how they might try to target your organization, or if you're just potentially another victim in a long list. You also need to identify, step 2 is to identify what you're trying to protect. So be it intellectual property, customer data, or maybe just your reputation in a marketplace. What do you need to protect? How valuable is it to you? And what is its value to an attacker? So there was a list published recently of data, sort of a black market for data. A set of credit card details is now marketing for about $5. I think a full Gmail account access is marketing for about $15. So all this information has its value. Understanding why the attacker might want it and what value it is to them will help you to understand what level of defense you need to put into place. And then also assessing the impact to you in terms of loss of operational, financial, or reputational damage. Perhaps seeing penetration testing as an insurance payment. No one likes spending money on insurance, but that expenditure needs to be proportional to the risk you face and the impact that any issues could have. Step 3 is prioritizing the efforts. So we can look at a pen testing strategy, prioritize protecting the most valuable assets from your biggest threats, combine some low-level vulnerability scanning with regular level 1 pen testing of your estate and level 2 testing of your critical systems and your critical assets. Will make sure that you get optimum return on your investment. So I mentioned before, a lot of consultancies just want to pen test everything, and whilst that's great, and if you can afford to do it, fantastic. But too many of us can't afford to, and so we need to really look at where to target that activity and what is appropriate activity for the risks that we're facing. So, by means of an example, your test regime might consist of regular internal and external vulnerability scans. Put a program in place, make sure you react to some of the findings. It's no use doing the scans, as we see too often, and then not actually responding to the issues that get identified. If in doubt, you can consult one of our qualified testers, and they will ensure that you can remediate those scan activities appropriately. We'd also suggest scanning following any significant changes to your infrastructure applications, so perhaps putting in board new offices or new product release. Regular scanning and also scanning follows significant change. Depending on the risk you face, but at least annual penetration testing. Level 1, protecting you against the opportunist attackers that might want to identify you as a potential target, and level 2 from protecting against those targeted attacks or for your mission critical systems or areas where you feel you have greater exposure. Third point there is annual internal testing, ensuring that your networks and applications are adequately segmented, that data is protected, both reduces the insider threat and can limit the potential impact should a breach occur. And finally, staff awareness campaigns. It's said often enough, people are the weakest link, and until it's demonstrated through social engineering campaigns or phishing attacks, we need to ensure that employees are constantly aware of the threats and aware of your security policies and your expectations of them to protect your organization and ultimately their jobs. So my final slide before we open up to any questions. To summarize what we've covered, building a structured approach to pen testing can help you maximize the return on your investment rather than just randomly pen testing various applications and part of your networks. And that structured approach can reduce your overall risk of a cyber breach. Level 1 testing can help reduce the likelihood of an opportunity attack, and the more in-depth level 2 pen testing can help you prevent targeted attacks from being successful. As well as giving you a reassurance over the defenses you have in place, pen testing can help you assess the operational, financial, and reputational impact that a breach might occur by looking at the data that could be exploited and exposed through a pen test and the systems that could potentially give access to that data, and help you to inform your incident response planning and the expenditure you need to make in incident response. And of course, regulation. Regulation will continue to drive security testing for a long time, and you need to make sure that, as well as spending money just for the tick in the box for that regulator, that you're also getting a proportionate return on your investment, and not just carrying out the bare minimum that's required for legal requirements. So thank you very much there for taking the time to listen to those slides. We have had a questions come in whilst I've been talking, so I shall pick out some of those. So the first question there is, how can we do the web pen testing? Any tools? Yes, there are a number of tools that can help with web pen testing, and those tools will help automate a lot of the more common attacks. So perhaps brute forcing passwords with a tool like the name escaped me, sorry about that. Using tools like Burp to try and exploit web applications. Burp Suite is a very common tool used by our pen test team, and there are a whole variety of tools out there, and actually there are a lot of forums as well where pen testers will discuss online the different things used. As with any tool though, it all comes down to the expert who's sat behind that, and tools will only typically identify vulnerabilities, and they may give you a measure of how common those vulnerabilities are and how easy they are to exploit. So really, you can't beat manual pen testing for actually identifying what can be done as a result of those vulnerabilities and helping to inform how to remediate the issues. The second question was also about tools. So rather than go through those, because there are a lot of different tools out on the market, perhaps if when we send out the slides, we will send out some good reference places to go for tools that can be used to help you with your own internal pen testing. Another question that's just come in is about the time it takes for a pen test, and clearly these can vary enormously. So if I look back at sort of the average time for some of our web application pen tests, we're probably looking at a level 2 test taking 5 or 6 days, something of that order. Obviously that's only an average. We see a number of very small web applications with limited amounts of functionality, and these could just take a day or so. We see some huge web applications, if you think of your online banking or trading applications, where those tests can be significantly longer than that. But for the average website, we're probably looking at about 4 or 5 days of work, and that'll include the reporting time. There's no other questions there at the moment, so I'll just hold on for a minute and see if, one's just come in, thank you. So there are growing needs for penetration testing for the smallest side of the SME marketplace. How can it be considered cost effective to this area of the business who aren't sat on significant reserves in their cash flow but still have a need? So thank you for the question, and you're right. As I alluded to earlier, attackers are targeting businesses of all shapes and all sizes, and it's really important. A lot of organizations will say, yes, you need a full pen test of everything you've got, and this is something that we're trying to differentiate within IT governance and say, let's understand the risks that you face, let's understand the impact on your business, and let's try and come up with something that's a bit more cost effective. So that could be a combination of vulnerability scanning. It could be some level 1 pen testing, and then say if there is something in particular that you wish to protect, or something that might be specifically targeted by an attacker because of the data behind it, or because of the operations of your organization, then those are the areas to really concentrate on it and look at level 2 testing. And by doing it regularly and doing small amounts, keeping your vulnerability scans up to date, it really can help to sort of reduce the impact. And we have a number of clients that we work with repeatedly throughout the year, and they have a much more progressive approach, a much more gradual approach to fixing their issues, which helps manage some of the costs. We just had a question around getting the slides. I don't know if they can still hear, because they put they couldn't hear, but yes, the slides will become available after the webinar, along with a recording, and also, as I promised earlier, some reference points for some of the tools that are available for pen testing. Next question is, how regularly do we need to carry network pen testing? Yeah, good question. And there isn't a standard answer. For most clients, we would say performing it annually or after a significant change is sufficient. But again, it comes down to assessing what are the risks that you face. If you've got a very dynamic network environment, then perhaps you might want to perform them more regularly. If you've got some particular piece of IP that you want to test, then perhaps get that segmented away onto a part of the network and test just that small set more regularly than that. But typically, we would look at annual testing, and standards like PCI DSS certainly suggest annual pen testing, but with quarterly vulnerability scans, just so that you keep on top of any patching programs that you've got and identifying any vulnerabilities. I've been asked here about day rates, so I don't know if there's someone fishing for a bit of the competitor information there, but typical cybersecurity organisations, you're looking around about the £900 to £1,000 a day mark. I think they're all relatively standard. I think IT governance that we do tend to try and keep the cost down for you. We don't have the overheads of some of our competitors. And we do also look at managing level 1 tests and level 2 tests slightly differently to try and keep the costs down for you. Next question is around reduced cyber liability insurance premiums if a pen testing regime is implemented. And yes, certainly some insurers will look at the activity that you have around your information security. They will look at things like, do you carry a Cyber Essentials certification, or are you ISO 27000 certified, and recognize that within your cyber insurance premiums. So certainly expenditure on pen testing and cyber security can reap direct rewards in reducing a cyber insurance premium. Who should be responsible for the vulnerability fix when the company does not have a specialized IT team? So good question, and something we come across a lot, especially in organizations which are getting more and more cloud-based, and that's a good way to go for organizations that don't want to be too IT dependent and have their own infrastructure. People often ask about the security of the cloud, and my response is always the likes of Amazon and Google and Microsoft, their reputation and the amount of resources that they put into security is always going to way outstrip anything that any of us else could do. So actually putting information in the cloud, having paid professionals to look after it is quite a good approach, rather than implementing your own data centers or your own systems. If you do need to keep that information in-house, you don't have your IT security team, obviously there are a lot of automated tools that can be used for automating updates. Most Windows systems now have automated updates applied to them, and we'd encourage people to automate as much of that as possible, or to implement systems within their patch management systems within their estate that can manage those with very little IT overhead. Right, so the next question is there a means of estimating the benefits of pen testing relevant to the turnover of the organization, e.g. to 20 million number of breaches in a year, risk management, cost avoidance? So there's no formula that I'm aware of. I would, if anybody is, then I'm all ears. I'd certainly like to see that. But as I talk about in the presentation, it's really about the risks that you're exposed to, rather than the size or the turnover of your organization. If there is a particular reason why hackers might find you lucrative because you're carrying a lot of cardholder data or personal information that they can use or they can sell, or because you're carrying particular intellectual property that might be of use, then maybe you want to spend a bit more on pen testing. If you're a smaller organization that isn't carrying personal data, that isn't carrying card data, then maybe it's not so important that you spend quite so much. So no, there's no formula rated to size, but it's really about understanding the risks that you face and what the impact of those issues might be, and then coming back to the fact that you will be attacked. The chances are there will be a successful breach at some point, and also getting a view of what steps you can take to help mitigate the risks once you have been breached. Okay, so there's a follow-up to that, looking at the size of it, which was particularly in relation to GDPR. So again, I think GDPR just asks for you to ensure that you have a security testing program in place. And again, no real magic formula, I'm afraid, for how much pen testing you should do. But I would focus a lot of my GDPR activity on looking at identifying where you might have data that needs to be protected and the measures are in place, and then using pen testing to verify that that data is adequately protected. And similarly with PCI DSS, reduce the scope, reduce the amount of data you hold. Certainly get rid of anything that's that you're not holding for a business purpose. Reduce the amount of data you've got, reduce the amount of access to that data, reduce the scope of the network, and then you can concentrate your pen testing on a much smaller scope and a much smaller set of systems and help reduce the cost. Okay, we seem to have reached the bottom of the question list there, unless anyone else has got anything else they would like to chip in with. Okay, so one just come in. If you host in the cloud, can you pen test without agreement from the cloud provider? And that depends on the cloud provider. So do refer to your specific hosting terms, because typically you will need to get permission. In my experience, AWS, Amazon, you usually turn around permission in about 48 hours, or certainly no more than 48 hours. And you will need to tell them what tests you want to perform, who's going to do them, and when they're going to do them. Google, in my experience, have tend to be a bit more relaxed and happy for you to do some testing, but do consult the specific terms of your hosting agreement. As you know, I can't comment on individual cases, and it's always worth checking that you've got cover in place, and certainly we will be asking for evidence that that you've got permission to test. So as a rule, yes, but the level of permission and the amount of notice you need to give, some hosting providers can take a couple of weeks to get permissions in place and require a lot of detail from the testing organization as to exactly what they're going to do and not going to do. So always worth getting that permission in place well before you're ready to start pen testing. Okay, so hopefully I've addressed the questions there. A last call if there's anyone else who's sitting on a burning question that they want to chip in with. Oh, sorry, I've missed one out actually. What is the future of pen testing, and where will it likely go moving forward? More AI-led, perhaps. And yeah, this was something actually which I did have in one of my my original notes for this presentation when we're looking at penetration testing tools. And I can well see that the tools are going to get more and more intelligent, and obviously a lot of artificial intelligence, looking at how to exploit weaknesses. And certainly on the defense side, there are AI tools out there that will help identify any breach, and I'm sure it's only a matter of time before the attack side launches a lot more artificial intelligence within the tools, and a lot of it will become automated. I think that perhaps begs a question as itself. If a lot of your defense relies on AI, are there ways that you can socially engineer an AI application and get it to reveal information that perhaps it wouldn't want to? And also there's a lot of research recently on seeding AI with bad data to make it come to bad conclusions. So AI is obviously still very much a nurturing and evolving field, but I'm sure that certainly the tools will become more and more intelligent for pen testing, and perhaps, who knows, the reliance on consultancies such as ours and the individual skills of the tester will gradually fall as those tools get more intelligent. Okay, so a question here: if time permits, deploying honeypots, are they worth it for SMEs, or is it suitable for every enterprise? I'm not quite sure. There's two spins I'm taking on this question. So in terms of honeypots and the use of red teaming is something that we often get asked about. Red teaming is an activity where, rather than a test of an application to identify every single vulnerability that we can find and exploit it, red teaming has a specific target or honeypot that you will ask the team to go after. There are two types of occasions where I've seen that employed with clients. One is, to be honest, just a demonstration to the board to say, these attackers took 2 days to download our entire client database, and this is how they did it. Don't you think we ought to spend some more money on cybersecurity? And then the other more traditional use of red teaming is where an organization will have what's called a blue team in place, where they'll have analysts who are sitting looking for attacks or tools that are set up to identify attacks, and you can set up a sort of red team versus blue team, the external organization attacking and your internal organization having their procedures and processes and tools tested. And certainly that is something which is becoming increasingly popular amongst larger organizations where there are security operations centers set up and teams of people who are there just to monitor and look for nefarious activity and shut it down as quickly as they can. So hopefully that's answered all of the questions. Just checking I haven't missed any others out as I look through the list. Okay, last call if anyone's got a question. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time. Hopefully, you've got some benefit into learning about how we approach how we approach penetration testing here at IT Governance, and you've also had cause for thought about how you might implement an appropriate strategy within your organisation. Obviously, you know how to get in touch with us if that's something you want to discuss further, and we will, as I said before, we will be sending out the slides and a recording of this this presentation in the following days, and also a list of resources for where people can look for penetration testing tools. So thank you very much for your time, everybody. I hope you found this beneficial, and yeah, keep your eye out for further webinars from IT Governance. Thank you very much.